Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So, remember how I told you there was this complicated game between me on the black side against Benjamin, and we sort of entered this position where it was around here. I told you it was a little bit tricky, right? I had Queen C7, but maybe white had a rook d1 and queen d4 idea. But in the game, I was allowed to get 2 rooks for the queen. So it's pretty much an even trade. The 2 rooks could be favored. Well, in this position, after rook takes b2, what probably was good is if this happened. Because now I play king g7, our friend Benjamin plays queen to e5, or something like that, right? King g7, queen to e5. If I go king to g8, there's a check on e8. If I go to h7, our friend Benjamin goes back to e7, right? So let's just demonstrate. Queen to e7, rook takes g2, king f4. There's no rook b4 because the queen takes, and there's no real good way to guard that pawn other than king g8, queen e8, king g7, queen e5, king h7, and back to e7. So this would have been a draw, but king f4, rook g6, threatening rook f6 like I said before, queen f5, pinning the king and the rook. Rook takes, and we enter this endgame where I had 3 minutes left, and it's not very easy to figure out, okay, how do I make progress here? And so my first hint at progress is playing rook g5 and h5. Our friend Benjamin stops it with f4. Now at this point in the game, I was like, how do I make progress, right? Because I want to play h5, king h6, or at least advance this pawn, And if I move my king back, the queen comes to f8, king to h7, and queen to f5. So I need to figure out how to really activate this guy. But it's hard to do so, right? If I check, king f2, and my idea was something like this. So eventually, after f4, I played rook to a2 because I said, well, I'm not touching this anytime soon. I'm going to try to rotate it around, maybe give a check or something. Queen e4, rook a6. And if f5 ever happens, then I'm just going to play rook f6 and then rook a5 and get the pawn, right? So that's my goal. King f3, h5. So I'm trying to make progress here. I want to get my king on h6 or try to free it somehow. My other option was to play rook to f6 and then try after king to g8 and rook to f8, but I only saw h5 in the game. Let's look at the time I had, which was 2 minutes. That's not a lot of time, is it? Queen to f5, king to h6, queen to f8, and I was like, okay, do I repeat moves here? Well, I kind of feel like it's winning, but I need to find out how to win, and winning with 1 minute on the clock without delay is hard. So then I was like, if I run out of time here, it won't be too much of a disappointment, right? Because at least I'll have proven to myself that I've been making progress. So rook a3. But rook a3 is considered to be a blunder because king e4. And now what happens? If king h6, what does white have? It looks tricky, but after king h6, there's the move queen. I was thinking queen to f8, but now I'm not sure anymore. There's rook e6. And after rook e6, king d5, then we might get rook to e3. And we might be able to escape on g6. Maybe. But queen to c8. And now, if we try king h7, there's queen f5 again. And there's really no good way to defend this pawn. So, that's crazy. But okay, in the game, queen f5, rook a3, king f2, rook a2, and I defend it on h2. Queen e4, rook h4. So now I'm pinning the pawn right here. Right? I'm saying you can't advance. And at the same time, I want to do something where I can escort my rook to g4 and push my pawn. Queen f5, king h6. Gotta guard it. Queen f8, and now I think there's my chance. Rook f6, check, king, and check, and no more checks. And now queen e3, but that leads to rook to h3. I could see it now, but I did not see it with 20 seconds left on my clock. So, weird things happen. I just took on f4 immediately, king g2, g5, and here it should be winning. But the problem is, it's extremely hard to find out how to win with 17 seconds to go and no delay. So my instinct here is, well, obviously I need to push, but I also need to coordinate some sort of check, right? So if I start with check, king, and king h3, and if I push g4 here, then there might be king g3. And then I do check, king, and what do? Do I push here? Maybe. Because after this, and king h4, queen h2, and I feel like there should be something, but it's very tricky with all the checks, you know? And let's see, rook to f5, queen to e3, and now I get to avoid, no, there's still queen to e8. So after rook f4, queen e5, now there's king h4. So I had to find the setup. And after queen e1, rook f2, king g1, now there's g3. So this is how I would be making progress. But in the game, I played h4 and I was bombarded with a series of checks, right? And at this point, I was thinking, check, and I was like, well, isn't there queen d4? And after rook f4, queen d7, and this is a draw, right? And in the game, I had seen this. I had seen this already. I was like, well, it's a perpetual, and I'll accept it if it's perpetual, because I know that I screwed it up. But after queen d1, king h2, our friend Benjamin noticed that, well, I was running low on time, and why not just flag me, right? And that's okay. I play h3 with 1 second to spare, right? I could have played king h5, ran out of checks, and eventually done the job, right? King h5, if queen d8 coming back to check, I just go bam, 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 and checkmate. So here's what white has to do. White has to watch on g4, right? So I can't do the check, because rook h1, but there's king g2 to watch on f2. But this works too, because after we trade, this is completely winning. I'll illustrate it. King g1, doesn't matter, h3 or g3, king g2, and after this, h3, king to h1, and now, bam, king g1, and g2 is the move, because after king h2, king to f2. So that's a little bit tricky, but it's there. So in the game, I played h3, and I'm once again bombarded with a series of checks. Check, or queen d4 would have worked too. Check, king h4, queen e1, but here I got rook f2, and now I'm making progress again. g4, king g1, and then I played king g3, and after queen e3, I ran out of time, right? And here, once again, I'm faced with a series of checks. If rook to f3, queen to e1 again, and then I gotta deal with a series of checks if I go back to f4. There's like queen b4, queen c1. So the win is not in sight yet. But what I should have done here is I should have played the move rook to f6, saying there's no more check on e7. So if white ever moves, I'm going to play rook f1. I'm going to play g3, and it's going to be a good game. So after this, white has to take, and then after g3, I show you the same technique as before. But as you can tell, it was a tough ending, and even though I lost on time, it didn't matter because the game overall was tough, and I don't blame myself for it. At first, I know I messed up the opening, and that's partially because I don't know much of the Sicilian Con theory. It looked like I did, but I didn't actually. And so after this, I lost the bishop pair. I was feeling quite dejected, didn't quite feel like I was in the driver's seat or at all. So I just developed my pieces. I played a tricky move, b5, but our friend Benjamin just handled it well. But then I got my chances, right? Maybe knight d4 wasn't as good. Maybe it gave me some chances to play e5 and all that. Maybe the right idea was knight to b4, right? Because once knight takes here, then there's an attack on d6 and an attack on b5. So that would have been good. I probably would have avoided the trade, and then something like rook to d1 would have happened because the other rook comes to c1, and that's not a bad position for white either, right? But after knight to d4, I was given a lot of tempo to try to catch up, right? I got d5 in. I got a lot of things in that I shouldn't have. And here, queen to c6 was something to consider. Because after that, I had to move queen to e6. And that's just something that I missed. So I'll keep that in mind for myself as for defensive resources and just trying to improve my intuition in general. Maybe knight f4 and knight e6 would have been something, right? Like I mentioned in our previous video. But after rook a5, I had a feeling something was fishy, right? Something was fishy about these three guys. And then I got the pair of rooks. And then things got pretty good for me, right? I got my rooks to work out. But I didn't have a clear way to win. It was sort of like because I had such little time, I wasn't able to plan anything. I just went with it, blitzed it out, saw some things, and I did miss chances along the way, but time is my worst enemy. And although I lost this game on time, I have no regrets about playing the game at all. So, thank you, Benjamin, for such an interesting game, and I look forward to seeing you on the battlefield again. And I welcome all our chess friends to have fun, do their tactics, keep training, keep pushing, do whatever you want, like chess, and as always, I hope to see you next time. Thank you.